He built an empire worth billions, yet one face from his past never stopped haunting him. 20 years after losing the only woman who ever called him son, fate led him to a quiet nursing home where a single name on a door would change his life forever. The city lights painted, his glass office in gold, and flashes from the media outside lit up his face like a man carved out of success. He stood there in his tailored suit, holding a glass of champagne while people praised his achievements. Billionaire, innovator, visionary. The world saw him as unstoppable, the man who built an empire from nothing. But when the cameras went off and the noise faded, silence filled the room like a ghost that refused to leave. He walked through the marble halls of his penthouse, each step echoing against the emptiness. His walls were covered with awards, framed contracts, and photos from global events, but not one picture of family, not one memory of someone who loved him before he became someone. His staff called him Sir. Investors called him genius. Journalists called him the man who changed business forever. But no one, in 20 years, had called him son. At night, he sat by the huge window overlooking the skyline, but the view never comforted him. He could buy anything he wanted, but not the feeling of being loved for who he was. He'd often close his eyes, trying to silence the world, and that's when she returned. Not in person, but in memory. A soft voice from long ago, teaching him how to tie his shoes. The sound of pancakes sizzling in a pan. The rhythm of a lullaby hummed off-key but full of heart. A voice that didn't sound like his, but one that felt like home. His mother. His black, adoptive mother. The woman who taught him how to dream before he even knew what the word meant. He remembered being a little boy, sitting on a wooden counter while she cooked. Their small house smelled like cinnamon and soap. She'd hum gospel songs while flipping pancakes, laughing at his silly questions about life. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day and sewing clothes by night, just to make sure he could go to school. She'd tell him, "Love never leaves the house, baby. It stays right here, even when you're gone." He never forgot that line, or at least he thought he never did. Then came the day everything changed. He got a scholarship, a chance to study abroad, the opportunity she'd prayed for. She hugged him tighter than ever, whispering how proud she was. He promised to write every week, to visit, to call, but life had other plans. Letters got lost. Phone numbers changed. Months turned into years. And somewhere between chasing success and surviving loneliness, their bond slipped through his fingers. He told himself she must have moved on. Maybe she was disappointed. Maybe she didn't care anymore. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had abandoned the woman who gave him everything. Now, 20 years later, he had all the things she once told him were just things. Cars, mansions, power. Yet none of it filled the empty chair in his heart. He'd walk through charity galas and hear people calling him an inspiration. But inside, he felt like a fraud. The boy who once promised to come back home never did. Every applause sounded hollow. Every deal signed felt meaningless. Success had made him rich, but guilt had made him poor. One night, as rain lashed against the city windows, he poured himself another drink and stared at his reflection. The man in the glass looked powerful, but the eyes staring back were tired. Not from work, but from missing something he couldn't replace. He whispered to himself, "You made it, but you left her behind." The silence after those words was heavier than the thunder outside. He thought about the nights she stayed up to help him with homework, about the mornings she'd walk him to school in worn-out shoes, and the pride in her eyes when he first said, "I'll make you proud, Ma." He had done everything to fulfill that promise, except the one thing that mattered most, going back. His world had become noise without meaning, wealth without warmth, and fame without family. But life has a strange way of returning what's lost. Not when you expect it, but when you've nearly given up hope. And as fate would have it, the path back to her was waiting, quietly in a place he'd least expect, a quiet nursing home, hidden behind cold walls and forgotten faces. He didn't know it yet, but his next act of charity would change his life forever. Because sometimes it takes losing everything to find the one person who made you whole. The morning sun spilled softly over the city skyline as he sat in his office, sipping coffee that had gone cold. His assistant stepped in, holding a clipboard with that same professional smile. "Sir, you're scheduled to visit the nursing home today for the donation ceremony." He gave a short nod, barely looking up. Another PR duty, another performance. Cameras flashing, officials shaking hands, and people pretending to care. He didn't want to go, but for reasons he couldn't explain, something deep inside urged him not to cancel. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe fate was whispering. Hours later, his car pulled up in front of the nursing home. An old brick building with chipped paint and a faded sign. It looked nothing like the high-tech hospitals he'd funded before. Inside, the halls were long and quiet, lined with wheelchairs and photographs from forgotten decades. The air smelled faintly of medicine and old paper. The sound of a radio played softly from somewhere, interrupted by coughs and murmured prayers. Every face he passed seemed to carry a story no one had asked about in years. For a man surrounded by luxury, this place felt like another planet, one where time stood still. A nurse greeted him politely and led him toward the common room. He smiled when the cameras turned toward him, shaking hands with the staff and making the usual speech about compassion and corporate responsibility. But as the flashes went off, his attention wandered. He felt a pull, a strange tug in his chest as if something beyond the walls was calling his name. When the formalities ended, a coordinator handed him a clipboard containing the donation acknowledgement sheet and a list of residents for record-keeping. His eyes scanned the paper lazily until one name stopped him cold. The world seemed to still in that moment. His breath caught. His fingers trembled. The letters on the page blurred as his eyes filled with tears. It couldn't be. That name. The same one he used to write on birthday cards. The same one he whispered in his sleep when loneliness crept in. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. Could she still be alive? Could she have been here all these years, forgotten, just a few miles away? He looked up quickly, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke to the nurse. Can I meet this resident?" She nodded, unaware that the name on the page had just torn open 20 years of buried emotion. She led him down a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and lavender. The walls were lined with faded paintings and photographs of residents long gone. The closer he walked, the heavier his steps became. His heart beat faster with every turn. Finally, they stopped outside a quiet corner room. The nurse gently pushed the door open and stepped aside. He froze at the threshold. The curtains were drawn halfway, and beams of sunlight fell across the bed. A frail figure sat by the window in a wheelchair, a soft shawl draped around her shoulders. Her hair had turned completely gray, and her hands, once so strong, now trembled as they held a small photo of a child. Him, many years ago. He stepped closer, and the sight broke him. His chest tightened, his throat closed up. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. How many nights had he dreamed of seeing her again? How many times had he wondered if she was proud, or if she'd already forgotten him? Now she was right here, the woman who had once been his whole world, sitting quietly, unaware that her lost son was standing only a few feet away. He took a deep breath and knelt beside her, his voice shaking as he whispered, "Ma'am, do you remember a boy who used to break your dishes just to get your attention?" Her eyes blinked slowly, confused at first. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. Then, softly, he said the words that once defined their home. "You said love never leaves the house." Her lips parted. Her fingers gripped the armrest tightly. Tears welled up in her fading eyes as she looked at him, really looked at him. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Marcus." It was barely a breath, but it hit him like thunder. He nodded, his own tears spilling freely now. "It's me, Ma. I'm here." For a moment, neither moved. Then she reached out with shaking hands and he caught them, pressing them to his face as if afraid she might disappear again. The years melted away. The pain, the distance, the silence. He leaned forward and she wrapped her arms around him with what little strength she had left. He broke down completely, sobbing into her shoulder like a lost child. She held him the same way she had when he was small, her hand resting on the back of his head. whispering the same words she had said every time he cried. "It's okay, baby. You came home." Around them, the quiet room seemed to glow. The nurse standing by the door wiped her eyes silently. In that small corner of a forgotten nursing home, time stopped. The millionaire who owned half the city knelt on the floor, crying in the arms of the woman who had once owned his heart. No cameras, no audience, no staged charity, just a mother and son who finally found each other again after 20 long years. And in that single hug, all the empty years dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful than success, the feeling of being home again. The next morning, the millionaire returned to the nursing home before sunrise. The staff hadn't even finished breakfast rounds when he walked through the door carrying flowers, fruit, and her favorite blanket. She was awake, sitting by the window again, her eyes following the slow movement of the trees outside. When she saw him, her lips curved into a tired smile that carried years of unspoken forgiveness. From that day onward, he came every single morning. The world outside might have demanded his attention. Meetings, contracts, interviews, but none of it mattered anymore. The only appointment that mattered was with the woman who once gave him everything. He learned quickly how she ended up there. After she fell ill, there was no one to take care of her. She had worked until her hands gave up, saved every penny she could, but life was cruel to those who gave too much. Her savings disappeared to medical bills, and when she couldn't keep up rent, she was quietly transferred here. Out of sight, out of mind. No family, no friends, no visitors. Just fading days filled with soft prayers and old memories. Listening to the nurse speak those words felt like someone was cutting through his chest. How could the woman who built his soul, the one who sacrificed everything, end up forgotten in a place that smelled like loneliness? He went to her room that night and sat beside her bed, unable to hold back tears. She reached out and touched his cheek, still calling him by the name she had chosen for him all those years ago. He promised her right there, "You'll never be alone again, Ma." The next morning, he called his team and arranged her transfer to a private care facility. Within hours, doctors, specialists, and caregivers surrounded her with the attention she had long been denied. But more than medicine, what healed her was his presence. He stayed. He didn't send assistants, didn't delegate. He sat by her bedside, fed her soup with his own hands, and laughed when she scolded him for adding too much salt. Sometimes, he'd tell her about the life he built, the companies, the travels, the people who called him a genius. But every time, he'd end with the same words. "None of this would have happened without you, Ma." She'd smile, shaking her head, saying softly, "You always were a dreamer." Between conversations, he'd look at her hands, fragile now, but he could still see the strength in them, the hands that once held him through every storm. At night, when the city lights flickered beyond the window, he'd doze off in the chair beside her bed. She'd wake in the quiet hours, watch him sleeping like a boy again, and whisper, "I thought you forgot me." One night, he heard her say it aloud and opened his eyes. He smiled sadly and took her hand. "I did," he admitted. "For a while. But my heart didn't." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. That night, neither spoke again. They just held hands until dawn. When she grew stronger, he began planning something special. He wanted her to have what she never did, a peaceful home filled with memories instead of pain. He found a house near a small lake, surrounded by wildflowers and willow trees, just like the neighborhood where they once lived. He remembered how she used to say, "Water keeps me calm. It reminds me that life moves even when we're still." So he built her a home by the water, where every window opened to light and air, not hospital walls. He decorated it himself. The living room walls were lined with old photos of her. One of her holding him as a toddler, another where she stood proudly in her work uniform, and even the faded picture from her youth that he'd kept all these years. In the center of the house, above the fireplace, he placed a giant framed photograph of her smiling, the same smile that once turned a tiny kitchen into the happiest place on earth. Around it, he framed newspaper clippings of his own achievements, but beneath them, he added a small plaque that read, "Because she believed, I became." When the day came for her to move in, he guided her wheelchair through the doorway. She looked around, her eyes scanning every corner. The scent of fresh flowers, the photo on the wall, the light streaming through the curtains. Her hands covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "This isn't a mansion," she whispered. "It's a home." He smiled, kneeling beside her. "Money built the walls, Ma," he said softly. "But your love built the home." She reached out and touched his face, tracing the same features she once kissed goodnight. For the first time in decades, she looked peaceful, and for the first time in his life, he felt complete. The world outside could still call him a millionaire, but here, in this quiet house by the lake, he was simply her son again. The news of his reunion spreads quickly. Social media posts, interviews, charity pages, everyone calls it the miracle reunion. Yet he never reads a single article about himself. He doesn't care about applause or headlines. The only thing that matters now is the sound of her laughter echoing softly through the porch every morning. The world sees him as a millionaire who made a generous act of kindness. But in truth, he feels like the one who's been rescued. From loneliness, from emptiness, from a success that had no soul. Every morning, they sit outside together, sharing tea and warmth. She talks about old memories, about how she used to sing him lullabies, and he listens like a child again. Sometimes she forgets small details and he gently fills them in, smiling through tears. He finally realizes how much he had missed her voice all these years. It isn't loud or commanding. It's soft, like the heartbeat of home. As weeks pass, their bond grows stronger, but her health grows weaker. The doctors warn him that time is limited. Still, he refuses to see her as fragile. To him, she's the same woman who held his hand through storms, who believed in him before the world ever did. He starts spending more time with her, canceling meetings, ignoring calls, skipping events. The world wonders why the country's youngest billionaire suddenly went silent, but he knows why. He's finally living the life he always wanted. One filled with peace, love, and purpose. He takes her out to the garden every evening, feeding birds together. She giggles like a child when the sparrows land near her feet. Those small moments mean more to him than every award on his shelf. One afternoon, as they sit watching the sunset, she takes his hand and whispers, "You gave me back my son, and that's the richest gift of all." He looks at her, eyes glistening, and says, "And you gave me back my purpose, Ma." That night, as he tucks her in, she holds his hand for a long time. "I prayed every night," she murmurs, "that you'd be happy. I never asked for you to be rich, just happy." He smiles faintly and says, "I wasn't happy until I found you again." She smiles, her eyes half closed, and whispers, "Then I can rest easy now." Days turn into weeks, and then, one peaceful morning, she slips away in her sleep. The nurses find her smiling, clutching an old faded photo of a little boy with wide, hopeful eyes. Him. When he arrives, he doesn't break down. He sits beside her, brushing her hair back gently, whispering, "You didn't die forgotten, Ma. You died loved." For the first time in years, he feels peace, not the shallow kind that comes from achievement, but the quiet kind that comes from love fulfilled. The funeral is simple, just as she would have wanted. No fancy cars, no headlines, only a few close people and the soft sound of the wind through the trees. Her gravestone reads, "Love never leaves the house." He stands there for a long time, fingers tracing those words, tears falling silently. Then, with a trembling voice, he says, "You were my first home, Ma, and I finally came back." He places a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, and walks away slowly. The camera follows him as he moves through the quiet cemetery, the sunset painting the sky gold. He isn't walking as a millionaire now, nor as a public figure. He walks as a son, a man who finally found his way back home. Weeks later, his company announces that all future charity donations will go toward elderly care and nursing homes, under the name the Grace Foundation. He never takes credit publicly, but those who know, know. He visits her grave often, bringing flowers, sometimes sitting for hours in silence. It's his new ritual, to talk to her about his day, his worries, his hopes, Even in her absence, she feels present. Her lessons echo in his heart like a living rhythm. Be kind. Stay humble. Love doesn't leave. And as the camera fades on him standing quietly by her grave, the world finally sees what wealth truly looks like. Not gold, not power, but love that endures time itself. True wealth isn't found in what we own, but in the people who taught us to love before we had anything. No success is real if it forgets the heart that started it. Because love never leaves the house.